Excellent. Great. Good. Thank you very much for joining. I hear somebody has a microphone open, and I believe there's construction in the vicinity. We can just take a look and see. So just a few housekeeping things. As always, if you're not speaking, please keep your microphone muted. We'll be using chat to take questions. So if you have questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to include them in the chat. We will try to answer them during the presentation. Some of the colleagues will be providing answers if possible. Otherwise, we can discuss them orally in the meeting. So we'll bring up Muge will be bringing up the presentation. And we'll take a look. So, okay. Excellent. Thanks so much, Muge. Let's go ahead to the agenda, please. All right, so I think pretty much everyone knows why we're here. I'll give a few opening remarks, then we'll get into the discussion, what the situation is today here at UNOG. We'll go over the different factors that have resulted in us having to make adjustments to how we're providing services. We'll speak a bit about what those adjustments are and how that plays out. We'll also go into a little bit about meeting planning for 2022, which despite the absolutely gorgeous fall day outside, we know winter is around the corner and we'll be doing 2022 very quickly. And then Mr. Adams will speak a bit about the 2022 budget and operating costs for virtual meetings. So there'll be a next slide, please. So there's a mix of some things that are new, some things that are not. One thing we're going to be doing is we are doing polls, which trying to make meetings more interactive. The way to get into the poll is if you're in Teams, when you look up to the toolbar at the top, there's an S that's for Slido. So you can click on that, and then from there you can go ahead and take the poll. So we wanted to take this opportunity to just do a little bit of a sondage, gather some information. So we can go ahead and I think we're doing the poll now. And we don't need, I think we don't need to keep on the question. So we can go ahead and scroll through this. Again, if you have a chance, so you click on the S up on the top where it says S is Slido. It's right next to the little hand raising thing in the Teams toolbar. And that lets you take the polls if you can, if not fully understood. This is a new feature in Teams, just for your reference. You might find it interesting. When you're organizing your Teams meetings, it's quite handy, and it can also be used to give people live results so you can see what the outcome is. So let's just go over the COVID-19 measures. This all is still remaining in place. It's interesting how things have evolved over time, but we are at this point not requiring vaccination certificates or negative test results to enter the premises. That's here in the Palais des Nations. I know some organizations may be doing this differently. I'll be going to Glasgow for the UNFCCC COP, and there, for instance, we'll be tested. I think it was every day. Maybe it's every other day to confirm that we're not carrying COVID. But at this point in the Palais, there are no plans to require vaccination certificates or negative test results. Physical distancing between participants in conference room remains at 1.5 meters. And the overall room capacity is limited to 2/3 of the usual amount. Generally, because of the 1.5 meters, we don't even come close to reaching the 2/3 capacity. We're still asking people to register through indico.un, which you as meeting organizers need to do when you're putting your registration page if people are coming in person, which of course we're encouraging more and more. And this is to allow for contact tracing if needed. Masks have to be worn all times when indoors, including in meeting rooms. And they may, of course, be removed when speakers have the floor during their interventions. I'd like to give send some kudos to our colleagues in Division of Administration who have been monitoring this very closely. Information is always available on the link on below. We will be sharing this presentation for reference, so if you want to take a look at that link, you can also include it in your meeting information for participants. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, COVID is restricting the capacity in rooms. We also are continuing to have, for most meeting rooms, we only can have one interpreter per booth. This also limits the number of languages we can have in rooms. I think we're very well familiar with this, but I want to mention it because the restriction is continuing. The other restricting factor that we have here at the Palais des Nations is the SHP. That continues to shift a little bit. One of the things I'm very pleased to share is that the SHP has done some design program changes to incorporate the proper audiovisual technology in conference rooms under renovation now in section AC, so that when those rooms come back online, they can be used for remote meetings. So we're very grateful to SHP for their work on that. But you can see that where we are now, we're basically at about 50% of our regular capacity. So the only things that are open effectively now is Building E, the conference rooms there, the Tempest, those 3 conference rooms, and then there's 2 conference rooms in the Palais Wilson, although they are not remote enabled yet. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is something that goes into more detail. So the first slide was a higher level overview, and you could see which buildings are coming and going when. This gets in very specifically into the conference room closures. So the first line, the AC building, that's rooms 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 15, and there's a new press room that's being built. Those rooms are expected to be back online March 1st, and we're really looking forward to that because we'll be able to use some of those to support meetings. At this point, they're closed. The assembly hall, all 14 and room 16 are also closed. That we're looking at having back online at the beginning of May. They did start on schedule, but you can see, so we're going to be squeezed for capacity. We'll get a little bit back at the start of March. We're going to get a little more back in May. Concordia will be coming back. That's not necessarily of broad interest to everyone here, but it'll be coming back the beginning of next year. You can see as well rooms 10, 11, 12, and 14 will be coming back in the middle part of next year. The C building, which is the council chamber, it's not going to come back till 2023. And then what you can see here, is the period when E building is closed. E building is at this point scheduled to be closed in October of next year. So what this means, right now we're very squeezed. We have very few, much reduced capacity in terms of conference rooms. When E building closes, that will not close until other rooms have come back online, but we will continue. We'll have a little period in the middle of next year when we'll have recently renovated rooms will be available, and we'll still have the E building rooms. So this may mean that, for instance, August could become a much more attractive time to have meetings than usual because we will have more capacity. But starting in the fall of next year, the E building is projected to be closed. That means all those conference rooms will not be available for meetings. So I mention this because this is this is a big issue for all of us. I know it leads to a lot of frustration, but we really have very little margin of maneuver on the conference rooms. Next slide. So we're going to go ahead and update this slide. Right now, this basically is another format for you to see the information I mentioned before. What this shows is that how many languages each room can have, whether they're RSI capable. This is a little bit out of date because there has been some great work from Division of Administration to bring some of the coupled rooms online for RSI 24, 25, and I think 21, 22. There's also a lot of work that's going on with Palais Wilson. I believe that those rooms should become RSI enabled.
We can show the updated one. I went back to version history and
okay.
She's going to put it.
Okay.
Put it on there.
Okay. So we have thanks. Sorry, sorry for that. We had a little technical glitch. I did some work over the weekend, and you know how that is when you work from home and online. So we'll show that updated slide, but it's worth, I think, spending some time thinking about looking at this particular slide, because I think it's helpful to see, and we're going to, as I said, we'll share this with everybody so you can then thank you. So here's, okay, it was there, it's now loading. There we go. So this is a different angle on the previous slide. Thank you so much, Mujay. So you can see we're expecting Concordia back, as I mentioned, beginning of next year. A number of rooms beginning of next year, 10, 11, 12, etc. This also is updated, showing some of the coupled rooms that are already ready. I've also listed on the right which rooms are scheduled to be RSI capable and when. So you see that we're making some progress. Room 27, for instance, we expect to be RSI capable by mid-December. and as I mentioned, the Palais-Wilson. So, but this is our conferencing capacity. This is it. And you can see that some things are closed now, they'll be opening. Other things that are open now will be closed. So this is going to continue for a number of years. When you get the presentation, you can go back and see when we're expecting to have the e-building done. And it's likely that there will be some delays. It's just how things generally go, because construction is, of course, a process. Okay, could we have the next slide, please? So what does all of this mean? So this is the reason why we're having this briefing, is we have, because we're using RSI platforms, which creates additional stress because of the complexity and because of the sound quality issues and how that impacts our interpreters. The standard meeting, fully in person, 3 hours, and we are ready to provide that. We are fully supportive of in-person meetings as much as possible. If a meeting has unlimited remote participation, the standard duration is 2 hours. We did an experiment. I took the decision in that we would start, I think it was in July, that we would go with 3 hours. And what that required was us to hire reinforced teams of interpreters. So, and I really give thanks to our colleagues in the interpretation section, of course, it's supported by admin, to hire all those additional staff. This was possible in the summer. Staff were available to do that. So we were able to extend this 3 hours, have unlimited remote participation for 3 hours. If your meeting has less than 30 minutes of remote participation, then that can go to 3 hours using a standard team of interpreters. So this is no change, really. The difference is that we are now no longer able to provide a reinforced team of interpreters. And partly this is because there's a lot of meetings that are occurring now across Geneva, and the freelance market is pretty much exhausted. And even though, I mean, we really understand, and I understand personally how disruptive this is. This is hugely problematic. You put a lot of effort and work into structuring meetings with 3 hours. You have member states who rely on that. There's people who are, you know, who planned that, and a 3 hour meeting makes you're able to do more work, and you need to have meetings to support your program of work. I understand that. But what we were finding is it was getting really harder and harder and harder to find the staff to support those 3 hour meetings with unlimited remote participation. So I took the decision that effective November 1st, we would stop doing those, because what we didn't want is for you and your delegates to show up expecting to have a 3 hour meeting with full remote participation and us not having been able to hire a team to support that. So what we're saying then is, if you're planning a meeting with full remote participation, if that remote participation is more than 30 minutes, we've gone back to limiting those to 2 hours. This is consistent with how things are done at the other duty stations. When I took the decision to expand to 3 hours in the summer, my understanding, we heard from colleagues in Vienna and New York who were questioning that because they weren't able to do that. So we're going with November, as of November 1st. In-person meetings are, of course, 3 hours, as they have been, as they will be. If you can limit the remote participation to under 30 minutes, it's a 3 hour meeting. If, however, you're expecting to have your meeting to be fully remote or more than 30 minutes of remote participation, those meetings are back to 2 hours. And given the complexities and the difficulties associated with changing this, we've made this decision, and we're going to keep this through the first half of next year, because we don't want to go back and forth, because that will again cause the turmoil of needing to restructure the schedule. So when it comes to planning your meetings for 2022, please go ahead and consider these parameters. Next slide, please. I wanted to explain a little bit about the issues with poor audio. I think we're all aware of that. When somebody's participating remotely, maybe they just have a bad internet connection, maybe they're participating from their phone, maybe they're not using a proper microphone. I always show off. I went and I bought a microphone. It wasn't that expensive. You can get one that's more discreet for like 70, 80 francs. And it makes a huge difference for our colleagues in the interpretation booth. It also makes it a lot easier for anybody to hear meetings. And we've all been in meetings where somebody has construction in the background or they have a bad connection, and you know how hard that is, and we don't even have to listen to be able to interpret. We have had, and I've mentioned this in previous meetings, some of our colleagues in the interpretation booths have had hearing issues. Some of them have had their doctor put them off on noise rest, which means they cannot work as interpreters until their hearing recovers. This issue has been raised with DMOSH, the Occupational Safety and Health people in New York, and it's even gotten to the Secretary General level. So we, on the other hand, now we recognize that it's not that easy to explain how this all works. So for instance, when I was first doing it, I mean, how would you know? What do you know? You know, you put in headphones, etc. So we have a lot of information that is available for you to share with your participants on the GENEVA, the UNOG internet site. But pretty much there's some really straightforward stuff can make a difference, you know. Like I said, a 70 franc microphone, you plug it into the laptop, already that's going to make a big difference. We're also doing a communication campaign to educate remote participants with a whole variety of things, explainers, missions, visual messages, etc. We're very grateful to those of you who've taken some of those on board and shared them with your remote participants. We're grateful that the secretariats will read out at the beginning of meetings to explain and manage expectations of everyone. We're working on having detailed scripts for our sound technicians to inform delegates during the onboarding process to say, you know, excuse me, you know, distinguished delegate, but unfortunately the way your sound system is configured, we do not have adequate sound to guarantee that you will be interpreted. And these onboarding things are really important because then somebody has a chance to do something about it. Telling somebody right when they're in the middle of reading their 1 minute, 30-second statement as fast as they can, there's not much they're going to be able to do. But this really is the reason why meetings with full remote participation, or even more than 30 minutes, are limited to 2 hours at this point. Next slide, please. Okay, so we'd like to discuss a little bit, how is this going to play out? What are we going to be doing with this? So they've already done planning for 2022 with the full calendar of meetings. So we take a look at the whole situation. There we go. All right, there's a quarterly review. They look at it quarterly and they assess changes. And that's done in the previous quarter. So in early December, they'll be providing information for the first quarter of 2022. And this allows us to reflect the evolution of the COVID situation. As I mentioned, we don't have enough rooms to meet everyone's requests for specific dates. I know this is a source of frustration often, especially because sometimes some of your VIP delegates or member states may have a very clear idea of what they want. We want room 22, we want this room, we want that room. Unfortunately, because we have such a tiny pool of rooms to work with now, we're not able to guarantee that to everyone. So we have to do a lot of juggling around to make the rooms fit what the situation is. So we will not be confirming dates to you. Well, we will, once we give you a confirmation for a date, that will stick. We may ask if it can be changed, but you should encourage delegations, etc., to not plan to have their president or their prime minister come to a certain time. We sometimes get requests where we're told, well, all of these people have already planned their schedule. This is the only time they're available. Now you have to give us a room on this point. We're not necessarily going to be in a situation to accommodate that. So we encourage you to get a date first, and then go back and say, here's our date that's available. I know that it's a fine dance, but we don't have the flexibility we used to. As a result of all of this, we'll be finalizing our room allocation based on the requirements of everybody who's meeting on that day in that period. And then we'll be sending the actual room itself to meeting organizers to you 1 week prior to the scheduled event. And so in that case, then when people are coming, because it can be stressful for them, oh, well, I don't know what room it is, there are those screens available at the Prenny Gate, etc. I know this is a problem, and I know this is really hard, but our goal is to have as many meetings as possible and make full and complete use of our capacity. Next slide, please. Okay, remote conferencing, this is just to let everyone see, we have had a big pickup in work. So last year in 2020, you can see we had, over 4,000 meetings. Of course, to remember that January, February, and the first half of March were the standard approach, in-person meetings, and then we had that gap, and then we went back to primarily remote. We're already at this point through the end of September, so 3/4 into the year, we had done almost 3,000 meetings. We're still doing some in-person meetings, and you can see that we've already done more meetings with interpretation this year in the first 3/4 of the year than we did all of last year. So this gives you a sense of how business has picked up. One thing I'd like to mention, I don't know if how many of you had a chance to watch UNCTAD 15. This was a really incredibly complex event, and kudos to everybody involved on that. I mention it because I think for participants, it was really interesting. There were all sorts of things happening. There were, participation from multiple locations, etc. There were some innovative things over this. I just wanted to underscore that this involved a huge amount of work and coordination from all of the conference servicing side of the house, of course, for UNCTAD itself, but it's not something that is the next normal here. So if you have somebody from a mission who says, yeah, well, at UNCTAD 15, they did da-da-da, why can't we do that with my side event? It's worth just mentioning that there was a lot of effort behind that. But I do give kudos to all involved on that. Next slide. So one thing that is good news is that Zoom is now fully available. So you remember over the last, 16 months or whatever it is, there were 3 platforms. We had switched at some point. We tried switching to Kudo. That was problematic. We understand how stressful switching is for both meeting organizers as well as our participants. So we are trying to minimize that. Over the last few months, there were a number of requests to use Zoom. That was handled on an individual basis. We're pleased to report that the OICT, the CEDO, has now approved use of Zoom in general, so there's no longer a need for special exceptions. At this point, the UNOG Zoom license and the UNOG DOA team is providing access to that Zoom license for requests that are sent through DCM's meetings management section. They are working to have a service that would be alternative to Webex. Many of you have used Webex, and it's useful for informals. It's quite a mature interface, and that sometimes has problems. So I thank our colleagues in ICTS of Division of Administration for the work they're doing on that. But hopefully they'll soon be able to start offering Zoom for all sorts of events. Just a reminder that all platforms require extra resources. That's on UNOG's side, technical moderation, etc., some of which the meeting organizers provide. And my understanding is that from your standpoint as conference organizers, that there are also it's extra work for you as well. And having the hybrid is, of course, what's complicated. So you have an in-person meeting and all that you have to do with that, and some remote participants. So then there's a lot of juggling there. Okay, next slide, please. So I've mentioned this in meetings before. At this point, there's no formal mandate for remote conferencing outside of it. Right now, we provide remote conferencing under the rubric of business continuity. And obviously, this business continuity measures, clearly that's going to extend through the end of this year, and it's not clear how long for the coming months in 2022. That depends on the evolution of the COVID situation, but I think it's quite clear that will be the case, certainly for the first half of the year. So we've been encouraging the bodies themselves to address the RSI issue individually in the absence of a global approach. We'll see what happens with this and how this evolves. I do know that some of the human rights bodies have expressed interest to have the hybrid conferencing, and that some of the oral statements and PBIs have included those associated costs. Next slide, please. Just a quick mention, the Committee on Conferences, which sets the policy for how conference servicing is done, they had their discussions a few months ago. They did not include anything about remote or hybrid meeting in their resolution. So there is not at this point any appetite for a global approach, but I think that will be evolving. We'll see what happens in the future. Next slide. Okay, so Clemens, do you want to, I think this one's for you, please.
Yes, again, thanks, Kira, and good morning, colleagues. I think Kira alluded already, during the current year, we were successful in getting some extra funding because, again, this year's budget did not provide nor anticipate any funding that would be ready to be used for all the extra work that is associated with doing remote or hybrid meetings. So as it's clear on this screen written, we have been funding only for standard meetings, traditional meetings in person. And the additional technical support for RSI meetings is not insignificant, as much as 4 times as high as the standard meetings. And again, I think Kira highlighted, and I think most of you are aware, we interact with delegates who want to speak, so this requires significant extra work to work with delegations who may have to make some adjustments to their setup, have questions, and so on and so forth. So with regards to the funding for this year, early on this year, we really reached out in a very significant manner from different ways to ensure that extra funding could be made available. The controller agreed to this requirement based on the projected requirements for this year. And so this is the situation. I think, let me go to the next slide. I think here, for the next year, we had long discussions with the budget division in New York before actually finalizing the budget proposal for next year. And we were told that as there is no specific mandate in place, and at the time one also had no idea how the pandemic would be panning out and that it would still have significant impact as we projected now for our conferencing next year. No funding was permitted to be included, and this was a central decision taken in New York. And so if we don't have, and I think Kira said it already, a specific mandate for the RSI type meetings, but we would be still required to provide them, we would have a significant dilemma to maintain the multilingual meetings with remote participation in the next year. So there are 2 scenarios. Scenario 1 is that the business continuity measures remain in place, and then we have, in discussion with the controller, pushed and got the understanding that a global solution would be found in order to address the funding situation. So that would be one scenario. Under that scenario, there could be part of the global solution decision that everything would need to be done on a cost recovery basis, or we could otherwise have to see how the funding through central pot could be again provided. However, I just want to highlight one thing that is very important for all us to recognize. The remote participation is significantly more expensive. The Division of Administration is already under significant pressure in terms of the funding. Again, there have been requests to reduce in a number of areas, the funding for the standard operation. And as such, there is really no way to find funding from other areas where we would perhaps reduce the services. So from our side, it's absolutely essential that there is either a return to in-person meetings, which I think Kira has repeatedly said is the preferred solution, or if there is a request for either fully remote or hybrid, where hybrid is the most expensive one, we will need to see that extra funds are being raised either centrally or through cost recovery for those entities seeking to have those conferences. That is the unfortunate and rather bleak truth, but I think it's important that we all understand it. We'll do our best to minimize as we can the cost, but quality meeting requires support through the different technical support frameworks, as all of you have seen. All right, so we're all here in one boat, and what we will try to do is to work with you as well as in New York to go forward. Over to you, Kira.
Thanks so much, Clemens. I think that's very important. It's, you know, this is stressful for all of us, and I think the situation continues to evolve. Certainly for 2022, I think when they have the budget discussions at the 5th committee, that some of this hopefully will be addressed, or at least will be considered. Next slide, please. Okay, just one thing, I know in the midst of the difficulties of rescheduling and adjusting things, that's certainly frustrating, but we are looking to see for the future, specifically what we're planning on and proposing in the 2023 budget. So UNOG has put together this is a reboot of a project that DCM did in 2018, 2019, conferencing today and tomorrow, and I think some of you may have participated in those interviews with the team at the time. So we've rebooted this to take a look at, okay, what's the situation with COVID? What was good? What was bad? Because of course there are many benefits from remote participation. There's also so many negatives, you know, and it's not clear, the consensus really hasn't built yet, but we do have this, we've updated this project. There's a team who is working on that. We'll be sending out a survey to ask for views, and then we're going to set up individual meetings with the client entities just to talk a bit more about you know, to understand your perspective as conference organizers, what worked, what didn't, and what we can do better. We're having there's an event on October 21st at 1 p.m. with our colleagues at the Knowledge and Learning Commons. There's going to be, I'll talk a little bit. We have Jonas Pasquier, who will be speaking from the Swiss mission about how the Swiss see the evolution of conferencing here in Geneva in the coming years. And we'll also have a colleague from UNCTAD who'll speak to us a bit about some of the culture change and how things had to be adjusted to accommodate this, to prepare this big event. So if anyone is in, if you're able to join, it's I think it's 1 to 2:15 or 1 to 2:30 on the 21st. Last slide. So we have one more poll. And I like the polls, but one of the things, we've done a few of these, and we'd like to get a sense of, is this meeting helpful, and get a sense of, should we do this more? One of the things we've heard from several different corners is, hey, we would have liked more coordination on this. And I get that. And it was a hard decision for us to make, because we had hoped, especially since we had money in hand, we had hoped to be able to continue with this 3-hour meeting modality. But in the end, it wasn't a monetary situation. It was just that we couldn't find the freelance interpreters. So I take on board that we need to communicate more regularly. But if you could take one last poll under the S, and sorry we weren't clear on what the rating, what the scale was, one last poll just to indicate, was this helpful, and what would the frequency be? So again, that would be clicking on the S. So now let's go ahead and let me ask let's start with questions live, and then I'll come back and pick up some of the questions in the chat as well. Eric, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Kira, and thanks, Clemens, for the information. I have several comments and one big question. The first one is that, well, I'm dealing with the Human Rights Council, as some of you know, and we have been, I suppose, quite innovative last year, and we have done everything possible to make these meetings happening. What we get from diplomats now is a sense that we need to get back as soon as possible to in-person meetings. That's very, very clear. They have come to the conclusion that virtual diplomacy doesn't work, or rather that it works if it is not possible to have in-person meetings. But when you do have in-person meeting, you can negotiate resolutions, you can have better quality in terms of reaching some form of agreement on the text and so on, and that avoids what we are seeing now, difficulties in the adoption process and so on. And they are really eager to come back. They don't like it doing what is being happening now. The problem we are facing is that, as you know, we are the face with whom we are facing these diplomats. We are facing the president, we are facing the bureau, we are facing delegations all the time, and they are raising with us quite a number of issues. There is one issue which we have successfully, I think, managed to overcome their worry, is the issue of interpretation and the quality of sound and the impact that it has on interpreters. This is something they did not understand before, and we did organize something during the session. We have talked a lot, and now they understand that, well, basically, if you don't have good sound quality, you cannot expect good interpretation, and it has an impact on interpreters. That is the one thing they understand. But now there are other things where they constantly come up to us. The first one, and now it's a bit over, it was this issue of Zoom. They just didn't get it why we used it for 6 or 8 months in the council very successfully, and it took New York something like a year or more to get to the conclusion that this was far more effective and efficient than Kudo and Interprefy and so on, and far less expensive. So this is something where they come up all the time saying, you people didn't get it, it took you so much time. And that's the one thing which is a very serious issue. The other one which I think where they don't understand us, when I say us, is Clement saying we're all on the same boat, is why we don't have a pass policy. That they don't get it. They say in Brussels, in other places, when we have meetings, people show the pass and they get in, and then we have meetings without badges and without masks and all these things, and we can organize things in person. So they don't get it. I think there should be some form of explanation why we at the UN, we do not have this pass policy, and what are the basic medical reasons, or what is it behind, because this is something they don't get. In terms of interpretation, Kira, what they also don't understand is this issue of impossibility to hire freelancers, interpreters. They tell us constantly, they say, but in 2018 and 2019, you had far more meetings, and whenever we ask for additional meetings, we got them. Now we got authorization from New York, but you cannot hire interpreters in Geneva, so we cannot have these meetings. So that is something where explanation needs to be provided in a manner which would be, I think, let's say, more exhaustive, so that we can also relay this, and they will probably reach to us, to you on this issue. And then on budget difficulties, I must say, Clemens, that there is a bit of an issue there. When the president and the bureau met with the controller back in, I think it was in April, May, they were all told, listen, we're very happy, you should be very happy, the financial difficulties are over, the liquidity crisis is over. ACABQ chair said the same thing and so on. And now we are telling them what you are just mentioning, that there are difficulties in Geneva, but it's very hard to explain to these delegates that they get from New York one response from the controller and from various representatives of financial bodies, but when it comes to the implementation, Geneva seems to be facing difficulties which are not the same as New York. So I don't know what the situation is, but maybe if you can think about what to respond to this question. And my question on my side is the following, where I'm very, very, very worried. When I'm looking at the table, which very, very useful table you shared, Kira, I see that by the end of next year, e-building will be over in terms of meetings and so on. And in exchange, we will go back to the assembly hall. So what will happen then? Because we will be losing 4 large rooms, 18, 19, 20, 17, 18, 19, 20, and in exchange we'll get one very large room which cannot be divided in 4 parts. So what are the plans? What do you expect to do for the, I don't know, 1 or 2 years which will last until we get back to this room as when the SHP will have reached the end of its completion? And I mean, do you have agreements with the Swiss to use CICG, or is something else planned? Because of course the meetings will be overlapping, and I don't know how you will be organizing this. Sorry for having taken so much time. Sorry, but thank you very much, and thank you very much for this opportunity. It was very, very helpful. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Eric. These are excellent, excellent points. We're really glad to hear that your delegates are saying they want to come back. We are going to put in the chat the recent letter from the PGA in New York encouraging people to coming back in person, as well as the CDC's response, the chef de cabinet's response on that. So in New York, they are looking at coming back in person as well. I'll just go through a few things from you, and then I'll pass some stuff to Clemens. Clemens, I'll let you answer on the pass requirement. I think Marie has put some information in the chat explaining what the issue is with the freelancers. We are more than happy to meet with delegations or bodies if that would be useful. Earlier last week, we met with the Russian and Belarusian delegations who had some concerns about interpretation. We're organizing a meeting with the Egyptian delegation and such to talk about some of the issues they had in Arabic. We had a meeting 2 or 3 weeks ago with maybe it was even longer, with Conference on Disarmament that wanted questions, and we are more than happy to meet with, ECE, XCOM, etc. We will be writing a letter to the chairs of the human rights treaty bodies explaining all this as well. But if at any time you think a meeting would be useful, we are certainly ready to do so. Maybe I can, when Building E closes, this is an excellent question. So there are going to be rooms that are coming open as the AC renovation is completed and the C building as well. But we are looking at that. We did meet with the CICG, that was maybe 2 weeks ago. And we do have some bookings with them, some for 2022, some for 2023. We had some brainstorming about possibilities. I see in the chat there's something about could we use CICG for certain things. We're going to see what can be done. Maybe it might be possible that we could somehow couple some of the, CICG with rooms here, that maybe we could use some of their interpretation booths. But what we have seen is how long it can take for some of these technical solutions to evolve, especially because, and I didn't go into this, there's also a semiconductor chip shortage out there, and there's a huge demand for audiovisual equipment, and there's a reduced supply of that audiovisual equipment. So for instance, the work that's being done with Jada and Palais Wilson to have those conference rooms remote capable, that has been delayed, not because of money or lack of will, but just because of the difficulties they have in getting the equipment. Maybe Clemens, if you wouldn't mind, if you could speak a little bit about the question on the COVID pass requirement.
Maybe I just listed down a few things that Eric, you raised. Again, let's first start with Zoom and the remote conferencing platforms. Frankly, from a Geneva point of view, we would have shared the concerns that have been raised. I have been using regularly Zoom even before the pandemic to join sensitive meetings in New York as part of the UNFCU board meetings without problems. So we have shared this information with New York, but they had serious concerns about cybersecurity and cybersecurity attacks. A number of measures have been taken by Zoom in the meantime in order to improve the situation with regards to the stability and the security of the platform. And we have been continuing to push. Fortunately, there has been appointed a CITO more recently, and he has really taken a very decisive step forward, and the organization is also in the process of buying specific licenses for Zoom in a setup that the organization feels it is protecting the specific sessions. I had 2 discussions with the new CITO, and we're looking forward to have this now universally set up. And we're also therefore happy because it reduces a little bit the burden of setting up these conferences. With regards to the issue with regards to using conference rooms and COVID, we are following overall guidance from the host country, and even in New York with guidance, they have, New York has established that the response measures to ensure health and safety of our staff, our personnel, delegates, and so on, depends largely on the local situation. And as such, we are following closely the host country guidance and regulations. We are as you may know, working closely with a group of medical officers. Here we have created the local network of medical officers here in Geneva, which includes WHO, and we are getting their advice. And on the basis of these frameworks, the framework we have adopted at this present moment is what we're following. So it is triangulated, A, on one side on the medical advice, and B, on the discussions with the host country. So I'm sure there are some further information we can provide in the fullness of time. As you know, we have Daniela Witz in my office, who is advising the Director General on these matters, and I'm sure if there is a need, we can have some further briefing on that. With regards to the apparent dichotomy of views, or that controllers saying one thing and we are acting in a different way, is not quite straightforward. I think here one has to look, it's not just money and funding. One thing is liquidity. That is having a budget and actually having member states live up to their commitments to provide the funding. Now, the situation has eased this year, meaning more member states have paid. So the liquidity situation has somewhat eased, and as such, we are in a slightly different situation. This allows us to hire extra staff, provided this is within the vacancy limits, and provide services where we now have money. Last year, we had some periods where we could not use the funding that was supposed to have been had been authorized, but there was no money in the pocket to hire persons because we just didn't receive the allotment, because the allotment requires money to be in the kitty, and during the year those kitty was filled and some more money became available and we could spend. This year the liquidity crisis has not been that acute, so that's one thing. What the situation is, and I focused entirely on that, perhaps it's clear to me, but perhaps less clear to understand, is the budgetary situation. You prepare a budget based on your program requirements. However, also within the limits, at least for the Division of Administration, of ever reducing amounts or targets in which we have to budget. I can tell you, since I'm here, we have allocated more resources to support conferences over the years, while overall our budget has significantly shrunk. Just to give you an idea, we have lost, under the regular budget, 21% of our staffing resources. So that is the situation that we are facing. But the point when the controller says the liquidity crisis has somewhat abated, that's fine. But if the budget does not foresee for certain activities that previously have not been provided for, as we have in the case here of the RSI support, where I have just given certain limited resources to actually support from a technical point of view the conferences. For instance, we have not really had any support from the IT side. We had audiovisual technicians and to assist with the sound operation, and also a related support, which is far less than what we have been requiring for individual RSI conferences. So here we have to separate the question between liquidity and budget, and for next year it's particularly acute because member states, frankly, are not ready to come to a consensus opinion whether or not to allow remote participation in conferences. And there we need all your support to really continue to push this. At this present moment, there is no mandate for remote conferences. There is no funding, therefore, for those remote conferences. So in the interim, as I explained, we were able to get some limited dedicated funding to enable us for business continuity purposes this year to align this. And again, these monies have been identified centrally by the controller because of reduced spending this year as a result of many people working remotely. So, for instance, in our area, we have obviously certain areas where there's not been travel, there has been less cleaning requirements and so on of the facility, has less utility. So if we go back to operating from the office, everyone is back to the office, this will require resources as planned for. This year, we have been able to slightly reallocate the resources. One final point, just to complement what Kira was saying concerning the impact of the Strategic Heritage Plan. So we are mindful that basically in the evening we have 4 major conference rooms. Traditionally, really only 3 were regularly scheduled because the fourth was for a long time. One was under renovation, and also one was less usable because of significant technical limitations. So what we have foreseen, studying jointly with our colleagues from Conference Management Division, is what really would be the minimum amount of large conference rooms required, and how could the standard conferences be accommodated that are the conferences that are on the calendar of meetings, the approved calendar of meetings. And we identified that if we have 2 large rooms, which is the assembly hall and it's the temples, but temples is built in a manner that you actually can relocate the 2 separating walls, and then you have 1 large additional facility. So once the smaller rooms in the Hall de Papadoue become back online, we will be reconfiguring the temples to become 1 large conference room. So in effect, you will have 2, and then we also have conference room 16, which is revamped, which also provides quite some significant capacity together with a few other rooms. So based on that, the projection was that we should be able to, not fully, but for the regular conferences on the schedule of conferences, be able to replace the needs and support the conferences that are scheduled. Thank you so much. I hope this has provided some clarity.
Thanks so much, Clemens. If I could, before passing the floor to Rada, if you don't mind, I'll go ahead. We'll have Marie, and then Rada, and then Lisanne. So Marie?
Yes, thank you very much, Kira, and thank you very much, everybody. I just wanted to answer Eric's question regarding the freelance market and what's the difference between before COVID and now. For those who don't know me, I am Marie Dieu. I am the chief interpreter, and I'm also an interpreter, and I've been an interpreter for 32 years. And what's happening now is something that we have never seen. So I've been a freelance interpreter for 10 years. I've never seen something like that. And these are problems that we are all facing. So not only UNOG, but all the UN agency, UN Geneva, FAO, UNESCO, we are all facing the same problems. So what's happening is the number of meetings exploded everywhere. So if you take an organization like WHO, sorry. So WHO, 60% of the meetings before COVID were meetings in English and French, and they had 1 or 2 meetings per day. Now WHO has 5 to 6 meetings per day in 6 languages, plus Hindi. So of course, the freelance market is no longer the same. And this is the same thing for ILO, this is the same thing for FAO, this is the same thing for everybody. So the situation now is a situation where we are all fighting to find a freelancer. We are all fighting for the same resources. And on top of that, we have a lot of freelancers, which professional domicile was Geneva, but they were living in their home country and they can no longer travel. So we don't find Chinese booths because they're all in China and they cannot travel. We don't find Arabic booths. They are all somewhere in Jordan, in Egypt, and they cannot travel. So this is also one of the problems that we and everybody else is having. And freelancers cannot travel because of COVID. So this is, so there is the explosion of meetings, and there is also the fact that a lot of freelancers cannot travel. So in the chat, there are a lot, some people are saying about WTO, but WTO is working with 3 languages. We're working with 6, and two of them being Arabic and Chinese, where basically it's now impossible to find freelancers, just impossible. So this is, I just wanted to explain why, the situation is how it is now, and just to confirm that everybody is facing the same problems, not only UNOG. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marie. I think that's very helpful. And I see some good comments on the chat. I agree with the comment that just came in that in the end, we are going to have, and I really believe this, we are going to have in-person meetings with Geneva-based delegates with a various amount of hybrid or virtual capacity when relevant or necessary. I also want to circle back to a comment that was made about why we're not taking the lead on this. That's one of the reasons why we're doing this conferencing today and tomorrow, is to have an actual sort of a study so we can use to feed that into the global debate. But just a brief reminder, Division of Conference Management at UNOG is under the operational authority of the Director General of UNOG, but we are under the policy and budget of DGACM. So we're not in a position to do something outside of the global approach. And I think we've seen with the conversion to the selection on RSI platforms, et cetera, that the global approach was pretty effective. But just to assure everybody on this call, we are very active at providing input and raising the concerns we hear from you and from other people directly into the debate and the discussion in New York. I think a lot of the concerns that people raised at the start of the last year, because we had this discussion last year, at the beginning of this year, there we were told, oh, you're going to have to provide money. People are like, we don't have money. And there was enough pressure from the various member state bodies here to New York to alert people in New York that, yes, this had to be dealt with, and that had to be dealt with urgently. So having these questions come up again now, we feed that into the debate in New York so that they see that there are global concerns, that there are concerns that have to be handled. Radha, if I could switch to you, and then after you, we'll go to Lisanne. Radha, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. This is Radha from the Conference on Disarmament Secretariat. So first of all, answering a little bit your question on the poll, thank you very much for the briefing. I think they are, perhaps one was overdue, let's say, and we would definitely support having them on the regular basis, including because we understand that some decisions are squarely on you, but the earlier notice we have, the better in terms of managing expectations, and ultimately, I think just the organization as a whole looks a little bit more put together. Let me put it that way. And also to reiterate that I think that this type of briefing continues to be relevant and important to office holders and member states more generally. Yeah, I think it's part of the due diligence of UNOG and the United Nations to let our members know what they can expect and what they can't expect, and the difficulties or not that we face and the opportunities that they have. I wanted to take the opportunity to thank Eric because he very eloquently put a number of questions that I have. Answers were given, but just for the record, I wanted to make a point on this pass sanitaire. It's not only a question of allowing, so I saw comments in the chat pointing to that there's a false dichotomy between RSIs and in-person meetings. I personally agree. I don't think all member states, including some pretty big ones, agree on that for a variety of reasons that it's not for me to dwell on. So we have a clear preference for the time being for in-person meetings on the part of delegates, at least those that I deal with. But we also have a situation where we have limited number of rooms and limited seating in those rooms if we continue to apply the social distancing. Plus the RSIs continue to be available, but with some, as we heard, limitations, right? The costs starting 2022 for RB meetings, as well as the duration. So you know, when faced with all these buts, I think one ought to discuss a little bit more thoroughly with the Swiss authorities what can be done in terms of the pass, just to allow meetings to take place. Connected to this, I know our first clients are member states, but and maybe I'm going a little bit too macro picture here, but the Secretary General just issued his common agenda. And all I read, I mean, I read a lot in that common agenda that has to do with multi-stakeholder processes, you know, bottom-up type of processes, meaning, you know, things not coming necessarily only from member states down, but vice versa. So how do we tally that with then saying, sorry guys, you know, we have limited this and that, so it's going to be only GA mandated meetings, and your super important, you know, meeting on explosive weapons in populated areas can wait, especially when some of these non-formal discussions that have started to emerge in the last few years are also priorities in the common agenda. So, you know, when we take all these, and again, I know maybe it's a little bit too macro, but when I think about all these, the constraints that we have, the messaging that is put out at the political level, I think, you know, we should look also at solutions and impress those on our host countries. And, you know, to put it very frankly, some of the delegates don't understand why they can go to a cinema with showing a pass without social distancing between the next spectator and not sit in a meeting room to do actual work. And then again, I think Eric raised a point that I was going to raise as well on what can be done a little bit more centrally to talk with our host country, which is very keen, Geneva International and all of that, on finding temporary alternatives or accommodation for, you know, again, whenever possible, in-person meetings, be it at the PFL, I mean, maybe even outside Geneva. So again, points that were made, but I just wanted to reiterate them. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Rada. Much appreciated. And I see a lot of comments in the chat as well about the benefits to hybrid meetings for the participation of civil society, et cetera, who can't travel. One point that occasionally gets made is we can use all these travel savings to support hybrid meetings. That only works if the travel savings are savings to the UN. The fact that the delegation of whatever doesn't have to pay their flights, they don't then send us a check or a residual saying here. And I say, you know, I saved $1,000, so you get 200 to go pay for my hybrid meeting costs. It's one of these sort of where the money sits issues. But some good points. We are working on issuing a note verbal. This was called for by, I believe, the Mexican delegate at the CD meeting we had that was followed up by some others. We have a draft. We've sent it to New York. We've gotten some comments on that, and we will adjust it as well to incorporate some of the issues raised here. So hopefully that will help, that you can then refer to that in some of your discussions. Let me turn now to Lisanne. Lisanne, you have the floor.
Thank you, Kira. And first and foremost, I'd like to thank you and Clement's team for the great support you provided during UNCTAD 15. So those were crucial for us to make it a success. And I fully agree with you that it's not a format to use for other meetings because of the complexity behind it in organizing such an event. So this is okay for a big conference, but for our regular meetings, I would not advise that at all. I just want to come back to an issue because I think Tim Eric flagged a lot of the issues and Rada as well. But the one I'd like to focus on is the cost recovery, because when we started with the pandemic, one of the issues was the use of Interprefy, for example, and the cost of that. So at the beginning, we were scrambling to find funding for that. And of course, our budget is not aimed at providing conference services. It's more to, provide the substantive and having staff to work on substantive issues. So how is that going to go for the future? Is there going to be a cost recovery suddenly for regular meetings, or is that something that will come out of UNOG and DCM's budget, basically? Because we have our budget, but it certainly does not include the conference management aspects of the budget. That's always been on the UNOG and DCM side. And it's that would be very difficult for us to start shifting things around again. I think it was agreed upon on an exceptional basis. But not being a budget person, but I think that would certainly create a problem for us in the future. Also, for us, I don't think that meetings will go back to being fully in-person meetings in the future. Although when member states negotiate, I agree with what Eric said, that this has to be done in person. It's negotiating on a virtual platform is not conducive to finding agreements in certain contentious issues. So I think for those who will certainly go back to really having full in-person meetings, but I think that for smaller meetings where we have discussions among experts, we will probably keep the hybrid mode of our meetings. That's all I had to say for now. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Lisanne. Excellent point on who will pay. I'm going to just make the analogy for webcasting, and our colleagues in the human rights can think back to the years of uncertainty and stress associated with that, which eventually wound up with the evolution to the point now where actually UNIS is properly funded. They do have people to do that. My bet, but I'm not an expert, is that that's how it's going to evolve. We are told that each body will have to determine its own entitlements, its modalities, and then that will drive an attendant PBI. But let me pass this on to Clemens, who can provide some more background. Actually, just Clemens, before I turn over, I mean, again, we do have the situation. Section 2 only covers translation, interpretation, printing, distribution, meetings coordination. So all of the technical aspects are for remote interpretation sits with DOA, and the webcasting sits separately in the UNIS budget. So it is a troika, a triumvirate, if you will, to make sure that the proper budget is available to have one meeting. So Clemens, I pass to you.
Yes, colleagues, thanks for the questions and comments. Again, I think the reason why I joined this meeting, other colleagues from my side, from the budget section, are also available. I just want to raise awareness. If we want to have conferences, we have to have resources given. And this notion, oh, my department has never had these resources, fine, understood. The point is we all need to understand we are here in the same situation. If we want to have meetings, they need to be funded. If they're not funded in yours and they're not funded under central administration, guess what? We can't do it. So for this year, I think we have made a significant effort, both on the technology side and on the funding side, to ensure that we can have meetings under unexceptional circumstances. We're extremely hard and jointly with our colleagues from conference management to enable you, as well as with your secretariats, to find ways to keep the show running. But if we do not understand that at the end of it, there are different kind of assumptions. If the assumption is we meet in person, then the funding is already rather limited. We have over years found some ways to allocate more resources to the conferencing support side when other areas further were reduced, seeing the importance of strengthening and ensuring continuity on conferencing activities. But again, we'll see that even the demand for even different conferences here is increasing. But if there are extra costs associated with the type of conferences that we need to support, and they are not properly resourced, or as we have seen a number of cases, to be absorbed within existing resources that don't exist, then we have jointly a problem. So I call on all of you, and that is really the important aspect here, to find through also your conferencing partners awareness that this needs to be resolved. talking politically, this is not my problem. Ultimately, boomerangs back to all of us. We have solved the problem earlier this year, and we will have to find a different way for next year, should we be in a situation that we need to provide RSI type meetings. And I fully understand and fully support the notion that it is desirable to have these conferences reach out to civil society, but there are extra costs associated with it. And under the regular budget, which has for many, many years been under tremendous onslaught in terms of budgetary reductions, putting more money to program than support, ultimately is bringing us in a situation where we cannot guarantee sustained operation. And I want everyone really to understand and take this message back. And Eric, if you hear these kind of discussions, we stand ready to clarify to member states. Said, oh, we hear that there is no financial problem with liquidity, fine, but there is a problem with budget, and the budget is the framework for assessing contributions. And the problem with liquidity arises, I'll just repeat it again, when member states, when assessed and having agreed to the budget, do not pay up. That has been the higher level problem that we were facing before. It is somewhat abated, but if you haven't budgeted for it, then you have a problem because you can't get money for those services. Colleagues, unfortunately, I have to run for today. I have some other commitments, but we can have some further discussions if necessary. If there are any questions in writing, we can take it up further. Thank you so much for your attention. Bye.
Thanks so much for joining us, Clemens. Much appreciated. Alessandra, I see you have your hand raised.
Thank you, Kira. Thanks, Clemens, and thank everybody. Just wanted to give you an update on the website side. On the webcast side. There are some good news on our side because, as Eric knows well, we were entrusted by the General Assembly with multilingual webcast. And we have finally almost, I would say, completed the recruitment for the various webcast officers or assistants. We are just in need to really finish off with the last steps, particularly for Arabic. But there is really a support in webcast, which thank also to the efforts of the colleagues of human rights, we have been able to secure with the General Assembly. Of course, this is a GTA support, so we need to have it renewed every year. So if it happens, and we hope it will happen, touch wood, we should be able to service your meetings, the mandated meetings only, with the webcast officers in various languages. The problem that has been mentioned by my colleagues Kira and Clemens is also obviously for us. We have a multiplication of meetings. It's amazing the number of people who are requesting webcasts these days for all kinds of meetings, from the debate, on historical issues to the mandated activity. So obviously we can only service the mandated activities as such, and for the rest we need to have extra support, which means extra money, and we cannot ask for it. We have to ask. I mean, it's a cost recovery effort. So just wanted to give you these two elements. We are also very much under strain. We've got these new people, they will help in the languages, but they will be dedicated to the mandated activity, in particular human rights, and whenever we can, disarmament. But for the rest, we will have to continue asking you to recover for cost recovery for these kind of activities. And of course, the amount that is requested by New York to put your webcast on record on it will remain, and it will remain to be asked to the clients. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alessandra. So I don't see any. Rada, I see you still have your hand up. Is that an old hand or a new hand?
Sorry, I think it's down, but the old hand in any case. Thank you.
Okay, and Lizanne, okay, anything else you want to add? Or because I don't know, my Teams is still showing your hand up. I know sometimes there's a lag there.
No, I lowered my hand on my side, so.
Okay, yeah, sometimes there's a delay. So thank you very, very much. There are a number of questions or points in the chat. I think we've responded to most of them. We'll take a look again if there's things. Just some summary again, mentioning we do have the note verbal coming out. We'll try to reflect the discussions that we've had today in that, so it's useful for you in working with your member states. We are having a library event, and we will be contacting you possibly to talk with our conferencing today and tomorrow colleagues to capture some of this input more in depth, which will then feed into a report that we're hoping to use in the 2023 budget discussion. And again, if you're in a situation where you have somebody who's complaining, if you have delegates who really have questions, we are happy to, if you want to pass those to us, we will respond. We will meet with people if need be, if there's complaints or concerns about the quality of interpretation or the services. Again, we are always happy to meet and explain the situation, because we know how frustrating it is for everyone. And sometimes it seems like there should be straightforward answers, and it's helpful if we can explain where some of the little nuances come in. I noticed in the chat the question was raised, a perfectly reasonable question: why can't we hire interpreters remotely? So this in principle, great, excellent idea. The problem is the detail of the technical equipment in the rooms, how you would get sound from those people in to be with the sound of people in the booths, and how that feeds into the meeting. It's just too problematic. So it's one of these things where right now the technical capacity isn't there. And also, just as along those lines, having interpreter in the booths mean that they also have the quiet place to work. It's right in the sound system. So that's one less element of uncertainty into the whole chain of getting the sound from the remote participant all the way into the ears of everybody listening. Again, if you have questions, please ask. If you want us to do meetings, please ask. We are happy to support you, because we know that this is incredibly stressful and difficult for you, and as it is for many of our colleagues. We've seen a lot of excellent efforts: meetings management, interpretation team, PRC writers, colleagues from Division of Administration, IT, and AV. It's people are really pulling together. Same thing with Eunice. We have a regular meeting once a week to talk about this. So whatever we can do to make things easier, please feel free to ask. But thank you very much for your attention, and I hope everybody has a chance to have a nice lunch and maybe get out and take a walk in the sun. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you, Kira. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.